So our challenge is to enable people to see how ridiculous it is to plant square miles of baby leaves, harvest them at midnight with giant fossil fuel belching machines, send them to a multi-100,000 square foot factory to be put into bags and little plastic boxes shipped from Alaska to Florida and up into the suburbs of Maine, and call the result, well, in the first place, we call it food. That's ridiculous. In the second place, we call it organic. That's even more ridiculous.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without toxic chemicals. You just heard from David Weinstein, who spent decades buying, selling, and distributing organic produce in California. David has a long view into our movement and sat down with Dave again last January to talk about the past, present, and future of organic. You can also hear from David in episode 76 of the Real Organic Podcast.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I am talking today once again with David Weinstein. We're at Eco Farm, and this time we get to do it in person instead of virtually, so I'm very pleased with that, David.
It's wonderful. I'm really glad to be able to be with you in the flesh, so to speak, face to face. I know we all live in the virtual, digital, video world now, but there's something very meaningful and special about having the chance to be in the same place, in the same time, sharing the same sun.
Yeah, that's right. So we've already had some interesting conversations. I was riveted by what you were just saying in that workshop. And when we talked earlier, I was also really touched by what you said. So both times you were talking about maybe what we dreamed organic was, what we imagined it to be, what we hoped it would be and become, and the ways in which our aspirations have been disappointed.
There was a time in my life when we imagined a world of such productive abundance that the notion of scarcity could be abolished, that we could produce enough and we could consume so little that there would be enough to go around so that everyone could eat, everyone could be clothed, everyone could live without the necessity of saying, I win, you lose. We don't live in that world now. We imagine a world where for every winner, there must be a loser. So I remember there was, now going back 15, 20 years, a very famous court case regarding the law school at the University of Michigan, which would only admit a certain number of students every year. And the court case had to do with whether or not the university could allocate certain spots in its incoming class by race to make up for historic discrimination. And some folks felt that that was right, and some folks felt that that was wrong. And a columnist wrote a column saying, this is a state school. If the state determines that there are more qualified applicants than there are spaces in the law school, the state needs to allocate more funds to provide more spots in the law school, rather than saying there's only that admission to a law school is a limited good. Just make the law school larger, and then you eliminate the problem. No one could imagine such an idea, okay? when I imagine what a food system would look like, I imagine a world in which human beings work with each other to meet all of their joint needs without the necessity of distinguishing some people from others and saying, these people can have their needs met, but these people cannot have their needs met. Some people can eat, but others must go without. Some people can get healed, and others must die. Some people can go inside when it's cold and it's wet, and others must live on the street. I imagine a world in which no one must live on the street, and no one must die for lack of care, and no one must go without the food they need. And I imagine a food system as a part of that that facilitates that goal. I imagine a food system in which no one is deprived of food for money. I imagine a society in which we don't hate each other for how we look or what we believe or what our opinions are. And I think that there's an intrinsic connection between that kind of world and the food system that we have, and therefore how we farm, okay? We farm in a way now where the downstream consequences of our farming are not our problem. There's somebody's problem. The dead spot in the Gulf of Mexico as a result of decades of over-fertilizing the Midwest is somebody's problem, but it's not the problem of any particular farmer, okay? Well, this is obviously wrong. This is obviously wrong, okay? The dead spot in the Gulf of Mexico is the problem of every single farmer in the Midwest, okay? The polluted streams are the problem of every CAFO that dumps its waste into the aquifer, okay? We know these things, but the way we farm doesn't correspond to what we know. The legal system doesn't correspond to what we know. The way that land and water is owned doesn't correspond to what we know. So I dream of a legal system that corresponds to what we know. I dream of a legal system and a social system that incentivizes cooperation and sharing over competition and hoarding. But we don't live in that world now, okay? We don't live in that world. I think there was a time once when we imagined that we could create a world like that. And it's my opinion that the movement to farm organically came out of that time, that movement, that vision of a world in which all could thrive. Now, we have an organic trade that is out of sync with that vision. I don't think it's an accident. And I can be very specific about it for you. When we started producing enough organic food so that we could supply stores, we looked around and said, how do you do that? What we wanted to do was share the food because we loved each other. But we didn't know how to do that. So we put a price on it and we sold it. We knew that dollars and cents didn't have anything to do with sharing, but we didn't know how else to do it. So we began to buy it and sell it. And then we looked around as it grew and said, well, how do you buy things and sell things? Well, you create farms and wholesalers and retailers. And wholesalers buy from farmers and sell to retailers. So there were two transactions. Each of those transactions was adversarial. We loved each other, but either the farmer got more or the wholesaler got more. We didn't share. We didn't ask each other, well, what do you need? And do that. We competed with one another. And when the wholesaler turned around and sold to the store, we had the second adversarial transaction. So we created a system for distributing food premised on conflict and competition. It wasn't what we intended. It wasn't what we believed. It wasn't how we wanted to live, but we had no other model, okay? And then we began to build a distribution system, and we looked around and said, how do you build a distribution center? And this was 1975. So we looked at the conventional distribution system. We said, well, we'll build it like that. And really honestly, for all the talk that we've talked, we really haven't changed very much. So we have a system for producing and distributing organic food that is essentially state-of-the-art 1975. The conventional food system has moved on over those 45 years and does not operate this way. But we do. We maintain a tradition of individual entrepreneurs competing in the marketplace, one with another, for the income they need to buy the things they need to operate their each individual enterprise. Okay? And we struggle haltingly to imagine a system that is not premised on individual entrepreneurship and competition. We struggle. We've learned a bit, but for the most part, each farm competes individually against all the other farms for the business of the wholesaler or the retailer, who then in turn competes with all the other wholesalers and retailers for business. There is no communal recognition that we're all in this together. We knew that once, but we don't know it now. So what was lost? What was lost was the sense that we're all in it together. And I even, thinking about it, I came up with a name for it. It was called a continuity of interest. That we were all interested, wherever we were, in the health of the planet. So each of us, one by one in our own way, went about our lives in a way that was intended to benefit the health of the planet. So, back in 1978, 79, 80, we used to drive a little old beat-up truck from LA up to Ojai. And in the back of the truck, we had a whole pile of used and reused and abused old banana boxes. And we'd take the banana boxes up to the farm where the oranges were, and we'd fill up the banana boxes with as many oranges as we could get. And any orange would do. Big ones, little ones, scarred ones, ugly ones, perfect, beautiful ones, didn't matter. All the oranges we could get went into the banana boxes. And then we turned the truck around, we drove the truck back to the store. And we put the oranges out on tables in the banana boxes at a very inexpensive price because they were just whatever came off the tree. And the people came into the stores and they went, look at these wonderful oranges for such an affordable price. And some people bought big ones, and some people bought little ones, and some people bought some ugly ones and an occasional pretty one because they wanted to put it somewhere on a display. And we bought all the oranges because different folks wanted different kinds of oranges. And we all saved money. But because we took every single orange that we could find, the farmer got paid for the whole crop, not just the pretty ones. So the farmer came out ahead. So we had evolved a system in which the farmer benefited, the store benefited, and the people eating the oranges all benefited because we recognized that there was a continuity of interest between the well-being of the farmer and the well-being of the store and the well-being of the people who ate the food. And we were conscious of it, and we intended to find solutions of that kind that benefited everyone involved, okay? But that was a long time ago, and we became professionals in our business. And we no longer pack into banana boxes. Now we ship our oranges from the orchard to the packing house, where they're very carefully washed and graded and sized, and only certain sizes go to certain places, and we waste a lot of oranges because the stores only want number one fruit of a certain size because that's all that the people in the stores who buy want to take home. Because we've forgotten the whole idea of a continuity of interest that was the foundation of what was originally known as the alternative food system.
So earlier you were talking about the divergence of the movement and the trade. This would be an example of that.
I honestly don't remember what you're referring to, but eco-farm is where you come to learn why we do this. Everywhere else you go, you learn how to do it, okay? Which means that most people, because they don't come here, don't know why we do this. And because they don't know why we do it, they're not to be critical, but they're simply ignorant of why we do this. They make very bad decisions, okay? They distinguish between fancy and choice and standard oranges, okay? That's not a decision you would make if you wanted to work with farmers who need to sell all of their oranges to make a living. We can't, in our marketing, find a way to distinguish between blueberries that are grown 150 miles from where we shop and blueberries that spend 2 or 3 or 4 weeks on a boat coming from another hemisphere and a country in which blueberries are anything but native and grown on soil expropriated from campesinos who can no longer sustain themselves, instead have to become industrial labor. These are, from the point of view of a merchandiser, equivalent products, okay? And they are, they're both blueberries. And why wouldn't they be equivalent products unless you come to eco-farm and find out why we do this, okay? From a movement point of view, a Peruvian blueberry or a Chilean blueberry and a California blueberry in California are not equivalent products. From a conventional standpoint, they're perfectly equivalent products. And if you don't know why we do this, why wouldn't you take the conventional point of view and treat them as equivalent products?
So, David, how do we spread an understanding of why we do this? EcoFarm is wonderful, but just in our country, it's a very small event.
It's 1,500 people for 3 days. It's not going to mean very much. No end of people spend their lives talking about peace. And the reason that they talk so much about peace is because ever since the end of World War II, the United States essentially has been at war. We divide up the war into bits and we give it names. We call it the Korean War and the Vietnam War and the Iraq War and the Afghan War and all of these different bits. And the Cold War. We divide up the war, but there's never been a time since the end of World War II, which is now 75 years ago, that the United States has not been at war. We have raised generations for 75 years to live with war, to accept the idea of atomic catastrophe at any moment as normal, to accept the endless flow of flag-draped coffins coming out of the bellies of airplanes as normal, okay? We create movies to celebrate war and the violence of war. We take that violence into our homes, okay? We have laws that promote the ownership of weapons of combat. We live in an enormously violent country. This is not true everywhere, just here. And so, inevitably, we talk a lot about peace because we see so little of it, okay? To me, the prerequisite for a food system we can pass on to our grandchildren's grandchildren is peace. Otherwise, we pass on a kind of agriculture premised on violence, okay? We need to kill all the bugs, okay? We need to make the soil sterile so we can add nutrients to it and farm it, okay? We live in a country in which violence lives in the soil, okay? If we want to farm in a way that nurtures the soil, we need to become people who do not do violence with every step we take, with every breath we breathe. We need to become the peaceful people who can farm peacefully, okay? This is a big order, okay? But the hardest part is how ridiculous we look. We look ridiculous, okay? You look at Allen Ginsberg compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Allen Ginsberg looks ridiculous. Thich Nhat Hanh looks ridiculous, okay? These are not figures that Americans look at and admire, okay? They admire Vin Diesel. They don't admire Thich Nhat Hanh. And so our challenge is to develop the courage as individuals to look ridiculous and behave peacefully, okay? It means that you will look ridiculous. The people you meet will look at you like, you are ridiculous because you are behaving peacefully. And if you learn to behave peacefully, you will farm peacefully. And the food that you grow will have been grown and harvested peacefully, okay? That's a very, very hard challenge, okay? You ask how we go out from here and do that. And I think that we need to learn the techniques of farming peacefully, of not, you know, if it wasn't normal, we would be embarrassed. I was at a farm one time that specialized in growing baby vegetables, salad mix. So, and you know what salad mix looks like? It's a leaf about this big, growing in soil, and there's miles of them. Little tiny leaves, one after another in rows, going on for miles in every direction. And what do you do with all these teeny weeny little leaves? You build an enormous machine powered by diesel fuel, weighing many tons, and you drive it down the rows with a little wire stretched between its jaws that slides under the leaves and cuts them ever so gently, while a vacuum at the top of the machine sucks them up off the ground as they're cut into the bowels of the machine, where they are carefully sorted and cleaned and prepared into bins that can be delivered to the factory and washed and cleaned and put into bags for people to buy. So you have these tiny, delicate leaves that we treasure because they are so small and so fresh and so young, being corralled by giant multi-ton fossil fuel belching machines driven down rows at midnight, which is when they harvest these things, okay? And when we're all done, we put them in bags and we call the results organic, okay? Now, if you didn't have your nose this close to the process, if you just looked at it at a distance and asked, what are these people doing? You would laugh. It's ridiculous. But if you live in America, that has been at war for the last 75 years and enshrines greed and selfishness as the moral conditions for any action, it looks, to use the favorite phrase of the financially warped classes, rational. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But that's how we farm, okay? So our challenge is to enable people to see how ridiculous it is to plant square miles of baby leaves, harvest them at midnight with giant fossil fuel belching machines, send them to a multi-100,000 square foot factory to be put into bags and little plastic boxes shipped from Alaska to Florida and up into the suburbs of Maine, and call the result, well, in the first place, we call it food. That's ridiculous. In the second place, we call it organic. That's even more ridiculous. And we all know it. We all know it. Everybody knows it. But we're hypnotized. We're hypnotized.
So David, if we woke up from the trance, what would we know organic meant?
You made a podcast one time with this guy, and I just listened to it recently, and I said, wow, I like what this guy says. I agree with him. And it turned out it was me. And that guy said that we all know that food is meant to be eaten not very far from where it was produced. We all know this, okay? We know if you're living somewhere with there's 4 feet of snow on the ground, you're not supposed to be eating salad, okay? It doesn't matter what Dr. Oz tells you. It's not what you're supposed to be eating if you live there. We all know this, okay? It doesn't mean that if you run out of something to eat, that you should starve. We have an obligation to feed one another. But it doesn't mean that we need to feed each other salad mix. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who lives in a little town outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he's retired, so he decided to go volunteer at a food bank. And every week they get a shipment of produce in, and they divide it up into boxes, and they hand it out to the people who come to the food bank for food. Seems like a good idea. One day he called me up, and he sent me a picture on my phone. He said, "What is this, and what do I do with it?" Okay? It was a Buddha's hand. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a kind of citrus that is shaped like a hand. There's a ball at the bottom, and then fingers of citrus coming off of the base of it. So it looks like a hand, a citrus colored, textured hand with and it has more than 5 fingers. It has many fingers coming off of this ball. And the inside of the fingers is pulp. So it's really, for the most part, not essentially edible. It's a good flavoring. You can take the cut off the fingers and put them in a martini and stir the martini, and you get a little bit of citrus flavor in the martini. You can put it in the closet, and it makes the clothes in the closet smell like citrus, and that's nice, but it's not food. They must have had 100 boxes of Buddhist hands in this food bank. And he wanted to know, when the people came and he gave them the Buddhist hands and said, "What is this? Why are you giving?" He had to have an answer. You're in trouble, okay? It's really not food. And we laughed trying to figure out how 100 boxes of Buddhist hands wound up in the tiny town outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's ridiculous. But it's our food system in action. We know we shouldn't be doing this. We know we shouldn't be doing it. And we do it anyway. Okay?
So this is true of many, many things in life, that we do things that we know we shouldn't do if we just step back and came out of that trance.
Yeah.
Again, how do you come out of the trance? How do you do it for yourself? How do you do it as a movement? Because I think the movement was intended to help people wake up.
I think,
and we won't even say to help people wake up, to help ourselves wake up.
people, in my opinion, no matter how rational, educated, sober we are people, we are storytellers. We tell each other stories, and we learn from our stories. And we learn what's most true from the stories that we're told when we grow up. So if we're told stories of competition and violence, then we learn that competition and violence is most true. If we are told stories that we are essentially bad and wicked and need to be punished, then that's what we learn, and that's what we know to be most true. If we're told hopeful stories, if we're told stories of cooperation, stories of love, stories of communities that help each other and nurture each other and respect one another, then we grow up knowing that those things are most true. And I'm speaking of my own experience, okay? Because I am a person who grew up with a vision of a world like that was possible. We could live like that, okay? That's the stories that my parents read to me when I was growing up. And so I think that to begin with, we need to tell our children stories of the world that could be. Hopeful, loving, gentle, peaceful stories of the world that could be. And we can do that with our children. We can do it with our grandchildren now that we're all old. And I think as a movement, we can begin to craft stories for adults that shift our attention away from what is most crass, most venal, most hateful, most antagonistic, toward a world that is not that. Okay? I listen from time to time to comedians. Comedians are terrible. They're terrible, you know? They make us laugh by tearing people down. Okay? They're funny. We laugh. But if you ask yourself, am I a better person for having listened to this? The answer is no, I'm terrible. It's horrible. Okay? You know, we ridicule rom-coms, right? Boy meets girl, girl meets boy, boy meets boy, whoever it is. They lose each other, but in the end, true love triumphs. And we go, oh yeah, chick flicks. No self-respecting, adult person would watch a movie like that. We want to watch movies of tragedy and violence and despair. That's reality. How about we start a whole movement to say, you know what? I like rom-coms. I like stories, where things work out in the end and love triumphs. How about we start living in that world? How about we saying, like, this is what reality is. This is how we could live, okay? How about I remember when I first started in the produce business, we were busy all the time. Busy. And every once in a while there'd be a holiday. Shit, it's a holiday. I can't take a holiday. I got work to do. I had people taking holidays off. How am I gonna get all my work done? And I hated holidays. Now I look at holidays and I say, you know what? Day off? That's a good deal. I'll take a day off if I can get it, and that's great. And I also look at it and I say, these are old historic days of joy and celebration. And they tie us in ways that we don't even know to the subtle rhythms of the planet and the seasons and the changes in the year. And how about we take these days, these seemingly random days scattered throughout the year, as a time to reflect on the changes in the season, We have, every one of us, we all have the solstice holidays. We don't call them solstice holidays, but they're all the holidays that come around as the seasons change. How about we take those days and not work and celebrate the fact that we're here to witness the planet doing its primordial rhythms? How about we invest ourselves in that? Okay, instead of saying, oh my God, I got POs to put in. Oh, I got to order this. I got to plant that. I got to, busy. How about we take time to say, you know what? The planet is renewing itself. And it's renewing itself in me. And there's joy in that. How about we share that joy with all of our friends and all of our children? Say, you know what? You live on a planet full of the renewal of joy on a regular basis. How about we begin to do that?
Thank you. That's good. I want to go someplace for a second. Something that I get asked a lot is, what is this regenerative thing? And you've been in the organic world all your working life, I think. And so what is your take on this regenerative thing? These people who are asking me are people who are advocates for regenerative agriculture, sure. and they're confused right now.
I'm old, and about all I've ever done in my life is buy and sell organic produce, hoping that by doing that, there'd be more of it around, more land being farmed organically, and more people having access to organic food to eat. It's really all I have to hang my hat on. And there's a lot of us around in that same kind of position. And some of us are a little insecure. And so when you say, yeah, but how important was that? They get antsy. They're like, oh, it's really important. You know, I worked 40 years at that. Must mean something, right? So they get twitchy, you know, when you say, well, it doesn't really amount to much, you know. And then you want to make them really twitchy, say, well, you didn't really solve very many of the problems you said you wanted to solve. You know, you did a couple things, you got some laws passed, and, you know, not using so much pesticide, but what about all the other problems that we had that you thought were so important 40 years ago? What'd you do about them? You know, and they get like, well, you know, we did a lot of good, you know. Don't tell me I wasted my life. I did something really good. Like, yeah, okay. So you got a whole bunch of young people going like, yeah, dude, I'm not trying to fight with you, but I got a lot of problems here. I got to deal with them. Yeah, well, you know, got to respect your elders. And it's like, okay. I don't feel like anybody needs to respect my elder. I'm old, but I left a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of trouble. There's a lot of trouble in soil, okay? Soil's better now, generally, than it was when we started. A lot less pesticides in it, that's good. But it doesn't mean the soil's in good shape. The soil is not in good shape. There's a lot of work to do. I want to make life better for the people who work on the soil. That's important to me. I am not a person who is going to look at it and say, well, are you telling me that nothing. I'm going to be like, good, you know what? I took it a little way down the road. You want to take it a little farther down the road? I'm for that, okay? I'm for that. You want to call it a funny name? Okay, call it a funny name. Organic's a pretty funny name. Organic's kind of a terrible name because it really means anything has carbon in it. And you guys like took it and misinterpreted, misunderstood it because you didn't ever go to the college class where they taught you about that. And now we got a name that's kind of a goofy nonsense name, but it's 50 years old, so we're kind of stuck with it. Am I going to be the guy say like, well, you can't have a funny name for what you want to do? No, that's stupid, okay? I had a funny name for what I do. You can have a funny name for what you do. It's all good for me, okay? Don't mean much, okay? And y'all are about to find out just how little it means if you don't have federal law to give it a specific legal meaning. And then you're going to be really upset when you can find regenerative Twinkies in your local 7-Eleven in another year and a half. But you all, want to work on all the problems I left behind for somebody else to solve. I'm for that. I think that's terrific, okay? I don't care what you call it. It doesn't matter to me. If it motivates people to work on all the stuff that we left behind undone, I'm for that.
Yeah. Well, David, before it gets dark, the sun is setting. Is there anything you'd like to say?
So that's where I want to leave it. I want to say, you know what? Another world is possible. A better world is possible. And all we have to do is be willing.
David Weinstein, thank you once again for talking. It's been a pleasure, as always.
You're entirely welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.